What happens when someone who is born and raised in the regular shoe world, padding, motion control, arch support, that kind of thing, discovers natural movement? We are going to find out with today's guest on the Movement podcast, the podcast for people who want to know the truth about what it takes to have a happy, healthy, strong body, starting feet first, because those things are your foundation. We break down the mythology, the propaganda, sometimes the outright lies that you've been told about what it takes to run or walk or hike or dance or play, any of those things you do enjoyably and efficiently. And did I mention enjoyably? I know I did. I just like to say it that way, because look, if you're not having fun, do something different till you are. By the way, we call this the Movement podcast because it is a movement about natural movement. We're helping people rediscover that natural movement is the obvious, better, healthy choice, the way natural food is. And you are the movement helping spread the word about that. So go to www.jointhemovementmovement.com, where you can find previous episodes and all the different ways you can interact with this podcast, where we are on YouTube and Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what to do: like and share and thumbs up and hit the bell icon on YouTube. And basically, if you want to be part of the tribe, please subscribe. More about that later. But first, let's jump in. And I am so happy to introduce Tony Post. Tony, I don't like to do intros for people, so why don't you just tell people who the hell you are, and then I'm going to ask you some fun questions.
So I'm just another footwear guy, just like you. I've been doing it a long time.
Wait, hold on. Yeah, this is Tony Post, the master of understatement. So please continue.
So I have been doing it a while. I've lived a long time, so I have the good fortune of working in this industry and in this business for, I guess, starting to get close to 40 years. Hard to imagine, but
you started when
I'm happy to be here. So let me start by saying that you and I have known each other for a while, so it's fun to do this, and it's fun to do a podcast with somebody that you've known for a while, because it's, you're really comfortable in that environment. But people may also know me as the founder and CEO of Topo Athletics. So that is a company that I started back around 2013. Prior to that, I was the president and CEO of Vibram USA. Some people call it Vibram. We made soles for a lot of different footwear companies. And then we also introduced a product called Vibram FiveFingers. And then prior to that, I spent 15 years where I really learned the footwear industry, working at, when I started, what was a small little family-owned shoe company called the Rockport company. And old school New England shoemakers, really learned about craftsmanship and footwear constructions. And it was really cool. But Rockport at that time was the only really casual shoe company that was using athletic inspired technology in their casual shoes. So they made shoes that were incredibly lightweight. They were very comfortable, maybe not to the extent that some of the things that you and I do, today, but for their time, I think they were an unusual shoe. And we used to, always be told that they were among the ugliest shoes on the planet too. So if you can my wife has always said, you've kind of made a decent living selling ugly shoes your whole life. So I've got that going for me.
Yeah, no, to call Rockport ugly compared to FiveFingers, that's a whole different that's, these are not in the same Miss America pageant. So I do want to back up. Yes, we have known each other for about 8 or 9 years now. And the thrill for me is you were one of the first people who reached out to us when we met at a trade show called Outdoor Retailer. We had this tiny little booth when we were selling our do-it-yourself sandal kits. We were totally not ready to be there. And you couldn't have been more friendly and supportive from the first moment. And I'm going to start crying thinking about it, because I really can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It's been real. And also, I like that neither you nor I shaved today, because we forgot we were doing this.
That's right.
And I'm wearing my glasses just to hide the bags under my eyes this morning. I don't know what's.
Maybe I should do that too. I have glasses here. I mean, I'm kind of in that in-between range here. It's like the further I move back from the computer, I don't need them.
Yeah, no, I'm much better this way, but again, really baggy this morning. So I don't know why. So the thing that I want to ask you, Rockport, while it was athletically inspired, and by the way, you were the star of perhaps one of my favorite commercials of all time, thanks to Rockport. Would you like?
Now you're dating yourself too.
Well, there's that too. I'm going to find a link for that if you don't already have one, and we'll put that in the show notes. But do you want to describe what that was, because it's awesome?
So let me just start by saying I went to work at the Rockport company in 1984, and I was a runner. I ran competitively in college and for a few years after college. So I was thinking that I was going to go to work for a running shoe company, but I came upon this little company that I just felt like was interesting and I could grow my career more quickly, learn things faster. So I joined Rockport, but ironically at the time, Rockport had a spokesperson that some people will know was a gentleman named Bill Rogers. Now, for those who don't know, Bill Rogers won the New York Marathon and the Boston Marathon 4 times each. So in his day, he was, really a well-known and popular top runner. And this little shoe company that made casual shoes somehow managed to get Bill as like a spokesperson. So that made it all credible and legitimate in my mind. And Rockport, as I said, used athletic technology in the construction of these casual shoes, mostly leather shoes, dress shoes, casual shoes, but not traditional dress shoes. They were kind of different. We used lightweight Vibram soles, and the way the shoes were made, they were very light. They had a little bit of cushioning to them, but not an exceptional amount of cushioning. Certainly not like, what we talk about in today's standards.
Well, dude, my Tempur-Pedic mattress doesn't hold what they're putting in shoes now.
Yeah, but it was, it was different than a leather sole. So, we were the first kind of dress shoe company to make shoes with EVA soles or, things like that. And so every day at lunchtime, I used to take the shoe. This is where we finally now get into the story. I was a product manager in the company, and every day I used to take a different pair of shoes out for a run at lunchtime, partly because I'm cheap and didn't want to buy running shoes, and partly because it was a great way to test different products. And I always felt like, if I can run 5 or 6 miles or 7 miles in the shoes at lunchtime, certainly, you'd be comfortable walking or standing at a trade show or doing a lot of these other things. And so we had just made the first dress shoes called the Dress Sport. And I came back after testing these shoes at lunch, and I kind of jokingly said, because our marketing director was there, and he goes, "How was it? What'd you think?" And I said, "Man, I think I could probably run a marathon in these." And I kind of said it tongue in cheek. And of course, he was like,
bing, 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 light bulb,
the light goes off. Yeah. He goes, "If you can, we should do that." And then, so it took a little while before it actually happened, but eventually I ran both the New York City Marathon and the London Marathon in Rockport dress shoes. And we made a commercial. And the commercial was really kind of instrumental to putting Rockport on the map. We were lucky because it was, it's kind of an old strategy for people who remember brands like Timex watches. They used to say, "Takes a lick and keeps on tick." And Rockport was, here was this company, this guy running in dress shoes, running a 26-mile marathon in, 2 hours and 49 minutes. So it wasn't like it took all day to get there either. So it kind of really drove home the point that these shoes are comfortable enough that, somebody could even run a marathon. And that kind of launched the brand.
Which was just amazing. And I know I've seen the commercial. It's still on YouTube, right? I'm going to find it. If not, I'll
yeah, I hope you don't find it. Maybe no, I'm sure it's there.
You were a young, fine-looking human being.
It was fine. It was fun to do it. It actually was really kind of a fun thing to do.
Did you have to do anything special to get permission to film at the marathons?
I don't recall. We had a small advertising agency, and I'm sure they did some things that were absolutely legal, and maybe some things that I'm sure they couldn't show, like the New York City Marathon logo in the ad and some of those things. But
so to go from Rockport, which again, I mean, in my teaser I said normal shoes, and they were not quite normal-ish, but they were still, they certainly weren't what we think of as natural movement or natural movement supportive shoes now, and certainly not what you or I are doing now. But then to go from there to FiveFingers. Now, at what point in that process did you start getting hip to the whole natural movement thing?
So as I mentioned, I was a runner, and I've, run competitively, but, mostly through my 30s, I just ran recreationally and for fun, and just, be able to eat and drink as much as I want, or, stuff like that. It tempered my gluttonous behaviors, maybe, I don't know, but I enjoyed it. I still loved it. But as you get older, things start to go and you begin to age. And I was talking to one of my friends, having grown up in Colorado, I was talking to a friend at a trade show who said to me, and this is before anybody ever talked about this, "Have you ever tried working out or running barefoot?" And I thought, that's crazy.
What year was this roughly?
That would have been, when he told me, was probably around 2002 or 2003.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Is when that would have been. And this is a guy who was a pretty accomplished athlete. He'd run to the top of most of the, like 30 of the 50 or however many 14,000 foot peaks there are in Colorado. So, he was a good runner, good athlete, good trail runner. And I had never thought of that. I'd never thought anything like that. I was experiencing some knee pain and some hip pain. And like a lot of people, I didn't make time for doing other forms of exercise, or probably didn't stretch or, do other things that balance my body a little better. And so I thought it was a really interesting idea. So it clicked in there around 2002, 2003. And I tried to start by working out in the gym barefoot. And I thought, my gym didn't want me to be barefoot, though. They said, you can't, for liability reasons, health reasons, we can't have you in here, being barefoot, going onto the equipment. If you were in the, the studio area, maybe that's something different, but, out here, you can't do that. So it's like, I kept trying to figure out what I would do. And I was working at Vibram at the time, of course, and we were making soles. All the company was we designed and produced sole platforms for a lot of other brands, great brands, really a lot of terrific brands, well-known brands, and some not so well-known brands too. But it was fun. I learned a lot. And I had this prototype that the team in Italy had bought from a design student who did this project as like his senior thesis. And they literally bought the rights to this product. And then, we agreed to pay this person a royalty if we turned it into something. And so I was introduced to this concept in Italy, and I saw it, and they weren't really selling it yet. But they had refined it a little bit more. So they asked if we were interested, the team in the US. And so I brought it back to the US and started to develop that concept. And to be honest, all I was thinking about was, well, now I can train in my gym wearing shoes because, they told me I couldn't be barefoot. And for those who don't know, and there probably aren't that many people, but FiveFingers was a shoe that was more like a slipper or a glove for your feet. It had individual pockets for each toe. So all 5 toes moved and worked independently. They were quite thin and close to the ground. So you had a great sensation of feel, but you had a little bit of protection. So more than if you were barefoot, but certainly not if you dropped a weight on your foot or something, you were probably going to break a toe. But
Of course, that's true with any shoe, which is the whole, you have to wear shoes in the gym argument is completely ridiculous because not like, a fraction of a millimeter of nylon is going to protect you from dropping a 45-pound weight on your foot.
Yeah, it's very true. And so I was using them in the gym and I started to feel better, honestly. I mean, I just liked the sense of being connected. I liked that feeling. And, it was a grippy Vibram rubber sole. So it had this kind of nice grippy sensation. And one day, kind of on a whim and thinking about that guy in Colorado, I decided, my knee was still bothering me, that I would take him out for just like a 3-mile run and just see what happened. And so as soon as I started to run in the shoes, I noticed that from, over the years, my form had deteriorated. And suddenly I was much more posture conscious, form conscious. And because it was a relatively thin sole, I had to figure out how my body was figuring out how to land gently, how to land softly. But as I ran, the miles started to click off and I wasn't experiencing that knee pain, not putting a particular brand down, but my Asics running shoes, I could barely run 3 miles and, that pain would start to come. But running in these, the knee pain didn't come. So I kept running and kept running. Well, that day, I ended up running 7 miles, which, for a guy who used to run marathons doesn't seem like a lot, but I hadn't run 7 miles in a long time. And I was just kind of in awe that, I felt like I had found this thing that could help me. Well, the next day, the other part of the story is the next day I woke up and the bottoms of my feet were really sore, because, they weren't used to that. And the soleus muscle, which is the muscle just below the calf, that muscle was tight and sore. And so I thought, well, this might work, but, maybe you shouldn't try to do it all at once. Maybe this is something you do gradually. And so that was kind of the genesis of FiveFingers. That's when it became clear to me, okay, here's this kind of cool natural product that allows your foot to be a foot, as you're, quite fond of saying. And, it allows you to move and work in a more natural way. And if you think about it, this is around 2005. So around 2005, shoes were getting built up. I mean, more and more stuff was coming on, plastic parts and, more this, more that. Every shoe had 5 acronyms on it for, all the different special things they were doing. And this was about kind of stripping a lot of that stuff away, which I loved that idea as well. And so that was kind of the launch. But as you say, it was an odd looking shoe. It certainly was not a shoe that.
I actually say it a little differently. I say it's the shoe that initiated a million divorces. It is, yeah. The thing, actually, I'll tell you this. So my thing, I first saw a pair in 2006. There's a store out here on the Boulder, the Pearl Street Mall called Pedestrian Shops, and they were one of the first stores to carry the product. And so, wait, go ahead.
Exactly that. I had 24 dealers that first year, and the gentleman who owns that store, Richard, you may know him. Yep. Had been in the footwear industry for a long time, and I had sold a lot of Rockports to Richard, and I was like, Richard, just help me out. I mean, I got nobody who will buy this stuff. Listen, if it doesn't sell, I'll take it back, which you never do. You never can say that to people. And he was like, okay, all right, we'll give it a try, because he's kind of a free thinking guy. And it was just a handful of people like that.
Yeah, he was one of the first people to sell Crocs. I mean, he's been at the forefront of a lot of things. So I went over there, and when you guys were in Wired? Was that also 2006? Because I think that's how I might have first heard about the.
Yeah, probably. I mean, the real launch of the brand happened at to kind of repeat myself again, I was going to run the Boston Marathon in 2006 in the shoes, but I didn't feel like I was really ready to run a marathon. I mean, I just started running, more than 5 miles. And so I found somebody who could do it, and they came out and did it. And as soon as that happened, a lot of people wrote about it. So, a few days later, it was in the Wall Street Journal, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. It was in Wired magazine. Shortly thereafter, it was a Time Product of the Year. And yet nobody had even heard of it. It was a weird thing.
Well, I mean, I went and tried a pair on, and I talk about it. I say it was kind of like when it's late at night, you go to the fridge because you're hungry, and you open it up and you don't see anything, and you close the door, and then you open it up 5 minutes later as if it's a psychic replicator. I kept going and trying them on every couple of months, but they never really fit my feet. So I've, Morton's toe, blah, blah, blah. And my joke is, had they fit my feet, I would have never started Zero Shoes. But the thing that I used to say to people, and since you're no longer with the company, you will take this in the manner in which I intend it. I used to, when people would say that they're running in FiveFingers, I'd say, well, 2 questions. How long did they last? Because there were some production issues in the early versions. People were having, whatever. And I said, and how bad did they smell? And if it was a couple, and one of the people, like he was wearing them and she was not, when I asked the second question, that started the argument. It was like, I don't let them in the house. And so, I wanted to say, if you want to look like a retarded gorilla, it's the perfect shoe for you. So,
you used to make videos that made fun of us, and we would sit around like a group of 8 or 10 of us and crowd around and put the video up on the TV in the conference room and just laugh, I mean, oh man, they were great. Your stand-up skills were coming through in those days.
Well, I'm glad. I'm going to dive into that in a sec, but I want to highlight something you said that I really love, which is, that after that first run, you had done too much too soon. And of course, the problem with too much too soon is you don't know you did too much too soon until you do too much too soon. But you did something that's actually similar to what happened for me, because after my first barefoot run, I ended up with a big blister on the ball of my left foot. And unlike many people, I did not think, what's wrong with this? Unlike many people, you did not think, what's wrong? I got sore. We both thought, oh, wait, there's something else going on here. And maybe there, for me, it was like, why is my right foot fine and my left foot not? That's interesting to me. What was my right foot doing correctly that my left foot wasn't? For you, it was that more obvious thing of, too much too soon. And what happens if? So that experimental mindset is frankly unusual. And were it not for that, things would not have moved forward, I imagine.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And for me, that's the way I need to experience things to learn and see what I think is right. I'm not saying, just like I think you said, I would never say that product is for everybody. I used to say it all the time. And, when you get a product and it becomes popular for whatever reasons, there were probably a lot of people that were using it that maybe shouldn't have been, or maybe should have used it a little less, or maybe not done the things they did in it. Maybe
I think it's a little different. And I just remembered one of the first things I said to you, and I think one of the reasons that I instantly adored you was the way you responded to this comment. I've often said seemingly obnoxious things to people within minutes of meeting them. Sometimes, but mostly because it's a thought that I'm having, and I just got to get it out of my face. And sometimes it's a test to see, can someone handle it? That was not the case in this situation. It was really just because I was having this thought as we were getting into this natural movement idea. This is now 2010, 11. And I said to you something along the lines of, the biggest problem is, well, let me back up. The fundamental problem is that human beings have been, especially in America, have been trained that the product is just the solution instantly. Just, you have a problem, here's a product, fixes it right away. And what you and I are talking about, and what we've already alluded to, is that what we're doing is getting out of the way to allow for a more natural use of the human body. That's what creates the effects. And just so I say, it's not about the footwear, it's about the form. It's just some footwear informs the form. So, but because everyone has this problem solution mindset, what happened is people got the idea, for whatever reason, that all they had to do was put on a pair of FiveFingers, or in our case, sandals, doesn't make a difference. All they had to do is wear them, and instantly everything would get better. And that's not the case. And I said to you something like, you guys are really dropping the ball on education. And it's not like you could have really done anything about it, because it was moving faster than anything you could have done. And I said, you're dropping the ball in education, and something along the lines of, this is the thing that's going to bite us in the butt, or it's like killing the golden goose, or something along those lines. And your response was, yeah, I know. And so, it seemed that in these early days, you were very aware that it had a life of its own to a certain extent. And, how do you stop a moving train?
Yeah, I mean, we did try to do a lot in education. After I left the company was actually even sued about some of these things, because, we made a lot of materials that said, like every product, for example, had a hang tag on it that said, among other things, if this hurts, stop, don't continue to try to push yourself through something. As runners, but probably as athletes in general, human beings often try to push themselves and keep pushing themselves and think that, things will get better. That's not always the case, and I think we did do a lot to try to help people become more aware of their form, conscious of that. We did a fair amount of research with Harvard University.
Right.
That, really helped us to understand what was going on biomechanically, what was going on ergonomically, what was going on, and how people could engage with the product better. And everybody's different. There's some people that are very used to being barefoot, and there are a lot of people that are not. We put people in shoes at a young age, and they're in shoes, most of the time. It's like wearing a cast on your arm. And if you cast that arm every day for, 20 years or 30 years, and even if you take it off at night, that arm is going to atrophy. The muscles are going to become weak. You're never going to have the same range of motion that you would if you use it all the time. So it just depended on the person's adaptability to a more natural condition.
Well, I've talked about that. I have this whole theory about the brain plasticity component of that. What is it that makes some person able to adapt very quickly and another person not? And from my research as an undergrad, I've got some whole theories about that. That's not the important part. But the thing that I just noticed was that salespeople and people just had this idea that all I need to do is wear these. And that was, the early barefoot days. That was sort of, while none of us were saying that was the message that was expanding faster than we were.
Yeah, well, I think, there was a book that came out, of course, that probably helped promote that concept a little bit.
What was it?
So, and I love Chris McDougall. He's a phenomenal human being, and I love everything about him. He's a great guy. But in reading Born to Run, I think a lot of people got the idea that they could do things that maybe they could do, but they needed to work up to it.
Yeah.
And so, the idea that anybody can go run 50 miles barefoot, well, probably not if you haven't, been training or adapting to that.
Well, you said it. I mean, this is a kind of a semi-argument I have with our dear friend, Dr. Irene Davis at Harvard, where I say, I think almost anybody could-ish. There's nothing preventing someone. If you have the idea that you could possibly run 50 miles in a pair of shoes, you could learn to run 50 miles barefoot. That's not an issue. But this is another Western thing where we have the idea that anybody can do anything that they set their mind to or that they believe in or whatever it is, which is patently false. I mean, I'm a sprinter. The idea of running 50 miles, I don't like driving 50 miles. So, that's not going to happen. And I actually said to Lieberman, the first time I met Dan Lieberman was at the New York City Barefoot Run, and he was proposing his theory that we're all persistence endurance athletes. We all just, learn to run long, slow distances so that we could hunt down animals. And I said, I'm not that guy. And he goes, well, you just didn't train that way. And I said, that's what all you slow people say. So I said, no. The difference between sprinters and distance runners, it's a whole different physiology. Like your guys might have chased the antelope down. My guys are the ones who showed up, put it over their shoulders and walked it home. Because me and my friends, we deadlift 3 times our body weight and you guys can't do a push-up. So that said, while you can't do anything, in the range of the things you can do, there's a lot that you can change. And again, the adaptability, the neuroplasticity necessary, especially to learn new movement patterns, because our identity is locked in with some of the ways that we move, some of the ways we hold our body in very subtle ways. So learning to deal with what we experience as frustration of laying down new neural pathways to learn new different movement things is challenging. I mean, dude, I'm 58 years old. I've spent 40 years trying to get the gymnast out of my body. So I was an all-American gymnast, and gymnasts all have the same posture, chest a little caved in because you're super, super strong in that direction. I mean, it couldn't be more standard. I mean, you line up a bunch of gymnasts next to a bunch of anybody else and you could pick them out without blinking. And it's taken me a long time to deal with that. But so anyway, blah, blah, blah. We took a tangent here. I'm curious. I want to talk about 2 things really quick. So when the FiveFingers and the whole barefoot movement was really blowing up, 2010 moving forward, what was that like, just being part of that? I mean, being at the top of that apex, if you will.
It was a lot of fun. It really was a lot of fun, and for a variety of reasons. It's always fun to see. I mean, I think everybody roots for, we weren't a big company, and yet we had kind of taken the industry by storm. And I think a lot of people like that when that kind of thing happens, when a smaller, less known, less resourced company comes along and takes on some of the Goliaths. And so I enjoyed that part. And at the same time, I think the biggest challenge for me was I wanted to advance the concept. Mm-hmm. I wanted to move the concept on to, frankly, other types of shoes, shoes that didn't necessarily have 5 pockets for your toes. And as I said, the company Vibram had been around since the late 30s.
Right.
And the founder of the company was a gentleman named Vitali Brahmani. And so, in a sense, I worked for the grandson of the founder in Italy. And when I talked to him about extending this concept, he couldn't get behind that. He was too afraid that, and probably for good reason, I think he made the right decision. He would rather stay focused on the sole business. It was nice that this FiveFingers thing happened. It was all good. And it was great that it brought creativity, freshness to the market. Kind of maybe a little bit of what you said, where, created a lot of divorces. It got people to think about things differently. And they loved that at Vibram. They loved that kind of concept. But at its core, the company was still a company that made sole platforms for a lot of other footwear brands. And that's what he really wanted to advance. So he said, if you want to do it, you can take the concept to other folks, which you saw. We did. Of course, Merrell was a great customer at the time, and we made the Merrell barefoot shoes and helped them to create that whole concept. We worked with New Balance and helped them to create the Minimus and that platform. And so we kind of took somebody from the outdoor, somebody from the run industry, our own, Vibram FiveFingers, and that was kind of how we built it out. But it was frustrating to me because I wanted to do other things that would advance the concept. And I always feel like there's a wide scale. There are some people that are going to be the purest, most natural, the people who really are barefoot all the time, regardless of the weather, the conditions, whatever. There are people that go a little bit past that, and that there are some people that need a little more help, to get there. And that was kind of where my interest was with Topo. And Topo, of course, comes from my name, Tony Post. So Topo Athletic is how we got there. I wanted to create footwear that would help you transition probably to shoes that are a little more natural, product like you make. But I saw a big market opportunity for, many people to be able to move towards something that was a little more natural.
Well, the guys at Ultra have said a similar thing, that they think of themselves as a gateway to zero shoes. And to which I say, well, I don't see you putting any ads in your boxes for me. So
yeah.
But I'm curious.
And by the way, one more story about that. Ultra, I said we had 24 customers. So Golden Harper's dad, Hawk Harper, owns a store in Utah, and he was one of those first 24. Yep. They fully embraced the concept. And even Golden, when they were starting Ultra, came and showed me the original prototypes and said, I promise we won't put, toes in them. Like, you're kind of doing what I would love to do. But
see, I just want to know, I don't know if you saw all the emails that people were sending to Vibram. I just want to know if you ever got emails from people saying, can't you make one for six-toed people? I mean, why are you discriminating against us?
I know.
I mean, we get requests that are like completely wacky from people who think that they're somehow normal. I mean, I've seen people, and I'm not trying to, be foot shaming anyone. I've seen people whose feet are practically square. They're as wide as they are long, and, complain to us that our shoes don't work for them. It's like, dude, no shoe has ever worked for you. But I find it kind of entertaining. We all think that we're not unusual in certain ways when we are all unusual in certain ways.
All unique. Unique is a good way to say it.
Okay, that'll work. Hold on, that's my favorite verbal pet peeve is when people say very unique. It makes me crazy. It's like, you can't be very one of a kind. That makes me nuts. Anyway, so, we mentioned something before. The lawsuit against Vibram, a class action suit, is one of the most misrepresented things that I've ever heard of in my life. And you were no longer CEO of the company when that happened, but you told me that had you been CEO, you would have handled it very differently.
Yeah, I would have definitely handled it differently. So for those who, now we're really getting into the minutia, but what happened was, after I left the company was sued for making false claims in marketing and advertising.
Specifically,
among the claims were that you muscles in the feet could grow stronger,
right?
Wearing FiveFingers versus conventional shoes that cast the foot. And at the time, of course, we had two pieces of information. One was going back to, I think it was around 2003 or something. Somebody could look it up, but there was a gentleman named Brueggerman who presented a paper at I can't remember what it's called, but like the American Biomechanics Conference or the Worldwide Biomechanics Conference. And this paper that he presented was a paper that showed wearing shoes with less structure and with less protection and, conventionality that we think of in traditional footwear. If you strip that away, that the muscles of the foot would grow stronger. And he actually had proved it. He had measured the muscle fiber against a control group, and it was a pretty large sample set. And so, there was this research that was accepted by the American Biomechanics Institute that said, that is a fact. Yes, we accept this conclusion. And I always wondered, should we prove it? And a lot of our people on the scientific advisory board said, I think it's kind of pointless to prove it because it's pretty obvious. You're just using the muscles in the foot in a different way when you strip all that stuff away. So if I was there, I would have fought the suit. I think the company didn't really want the confrontation. Yeah. And so they just agreed to settle the lawsuit. They had done pretty well financially, and they agreed to make a donation to some organization, to effectively.
How ironic that a bunch of Italians didn't want to fight something. I'm amazed. It's like, I think we can take care of this out of court. Maybe I think I know a guy who knows a guy. He'll make it all go away.
Yeah.
I have a theory. I don't know if it's true. Well, first of all, the thing that amazes me about the lawsuit is that you just described it exactly the way it went down. But the way it was framed is that this proves that barefoot is bullshit and that running barefoot or running in these things will injure you,
or that it's not good for you. I think that's what people thought. That was what they got out of that was, it's not good for you. It's not healthy.
Which is an amazing gap. And I have two theories. One, actually, I don't know if I ever told you this. I talked to someone who was the VP of marketing at at a company that you mentioned. I'm not going to say which one. We'll leave it that vague. And I said, correct me if I'm wrong, but you found out that the lawsuit settled for $3.75 million. And you spun that story and put that out into your media contacts about how barefoot isn't good for you. Is that correct? And he goes, yeah, of course. So the story was being controlled not by the people who knew what was going on, which was an amazing thing to discover. But I have another theory, and it was a class action lawsuit. My theory, my suspicion is that it was sponsored surreptitiously by a larger shoe company. And I say that in part because in the early barefoot days, if you will, 2009, early 2010, the big shoe companies were freaking out. I mean, they were doing massive PR. Well, there was an article that came out. Let me say it differently. People were pointing to something on the web that looked like an article about how barefoot was going to kill you and you needed motion control stability shoes. And I seemed to be the only one that noticed it was a native ad because there was a tiny little thing that said sponsored by Brooks Running, which is ironic for a number of reasons, not the least of which being that you and I both know the guy who's the CEO of Brooks, and he knows that natural movement's a real thing. So, but his business was doing very different things. So from that and all the companies that were coming out saying, if you take off your big, thick shoes, you're going to kill yourself. That's one of the reasons why I have this completely unproven theory about the sponsorship of the lawsuit, because the person who was the lead in the class was talking about how she got injured. This is my memory, so pardon me if it's inaccurate. She got injured wearing these shoes, but that had nothing to do with the suit, which was about false medical claim. So the conflation of these things seems so deliberate in my mind that I hope someday to find out. I could be wrong, and I'd be happy to be wrong, but I'm dying.
Yeah, I think people know that there are law firms out there that specialize in this kind of thing anyway. Mm-hmm. And so it's like patent trolls, or it's very similar, where they'll just try and seek out an opportunity regardless of whether or not it's credible or legitimate, in hopes that they'll achieve some kind of a settlement.
So you're saying the simpler explanation is you douchebag lawyer.
I'm sure there's some good lawyers out there, but this one probably wasn't one of them. So.
Well, you just raised another point. So, one of the other things that happened with FiveFingers is just people ripping off that idea like there was no tomorrow. What was that like? And what did you guys do or not do? Or what did you learn from that? And by the way, I ask because I'm starting to see it happen to us. I'm seeing design elements of ours suddenly being used by large companies. I won't mention names like Bikey or Adidas.
Well, there's a couple different things we did. Obviously, within the trade journals, we advertised about our patents. And you mentioned, I've been involved in some funny ads. We actually did a very funny ad, so I would encourage you to search it. I know this is on Google, and if you searched out Vibram patent infringement advertising or something like that, you would uncover a very fun image. We took the foot of the 5 toes of the Vibram FiveFingers and did something which some people probably would consider slightly profane.
I loved this ad. Oh, and my God.
It was just to warn people that, we have patents and we try to protect our patents, and, we have a responsibility to protect our patents, for shareholders and everybody else. So,
you were quoted somewhere saying that perhaps your money may have been better spent building more relationship with the customers than infringing or dealing with the patents, because of what a money hole that is.
Yeah.
We're in a situation now, we don't have patents on a couple of things because we didn't get them because we didn't have the money way back when, and we didn't know if we could anyway. And now we're watching people take some of our design ideas and some of our utility ideas as well. And we do have a number of patents, but on some of the things that are being taken now, not so much. And the footwear industry is just incredible. The first lesson I got, guys who we met who'd been in footwear for 35 years, we were at one of the footwear related trade shows, and the first booth we stopped in was someone who had the exact product that they were making and looking to license. And I was just kind of dumbstruck by that phenomenon. He goes, once it exists, everybody knows it. And, it's just so hard to protect what you're doing in footwear.
And I believe in a certain amount of that too, that you just got to keep moving. You've just got to always keep inventing, always keep advancing, always keep, trying to improve the customer experience. And if you do that and don't just rest on your patents or your laurels, I think you'll be a better company.
So it's interesting, the Brueggemann study saying, just doing less is better for you, less is more. Ironically, that's exactly the point that Nike is now making about their new shoes that they say reduces injury. They say we got rid of a lot of the protective features in our best-selling motion control padded shoe, the Zoom structure, and that seemed to reduce injury. It's like, yeah. And of course, if you just went even farther, in fact, there was an article that just showed up on like Yahoo Finance where they quoted me about this. And it's like, well, yeah, we just got rid of even more of the protective features, and we're, seeing wonderful things from the people who experienced that. And of course, their thing with the protective features, it's so yes, that new shoe reduced injuries by 50%, a little over 50% compared to the control shoe. But still, during their 12-week study, almost 1 in 3 people got injured in the control, and 1 in 7 got injured in the new shoe, which is, I like to say, it's like me saying, I'm going to buy you dinner at a restaurant every night this week. Do you want to go to the one where you get food poisoning twice on average or once on average? Neither one of those makes sense to me. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's move on to Topo then, because there's an interesting evolutionary things that you did there. You came in with one idea that evolved into something new. I'd love to hear just, what were you thinking? Actually, what were you thinking when you were starting a shoe company? I say that because these guys that I just mentioned, when we met them, they said, we believe in you and Lena and what you guys are doing, and we would start this shoe company with you, but we've been in footwear for 35 years and we're not stupid enough to start a shoe company. So what made you stupid enough to start a shoe company? And talk to me about the evolution of it.
I think, from the time I worked at Rockport, I saw how the owner of that company really was able to express himself in footwear and do, a lot of good things. And I saw that company grow, and I had a similar kind of experience where I had probably more of the controls in my hand at Vibram. And so maybe I had a little too much arrogance about it, or not arrogance, but maybe I was overconfident about, how you could build a company. And I have a lot of respect for you and anybody who has ever tried to build a company. It's really, really hard. I've been a part of these 2 companies that succeeded, became, multi-$100 million companies. And when you go through that experience, you feel like, well, I've been a part of this a couple of times, but to start it again, it's really hard. And so I have a lot of respect for entrepreneurs and people who try to build businesses and who try to create things and make things from scratch and fill a need and deliver an experience. At the end of the day, it comes down to, am I going to make something that's going to improve the quality of people's lives? That's what you believe, and that's what I have to believe, or I wouldn't do it. That's really the reason to do it. And then work with a group of people who share that belief, who share that passion. And there are people with all different needs, all different tastes, all different attitudes out there. So there's a wide range of people that you can help. And so I've always in my life tried to, kind of have this narrow vision of who my customer is, not appealing to everybody, because clearly I've never made shoes that appeal to everybody, but I try to make shoes that I think for a particular person that I have in mind is really going to benefit that person, is really going to improve the experience and deliver a better value. And so that's what I wanted to do with Topo. And with Topo, for me, it started with the fit. And so the fit had to be, obviously I wanted that sensation of allowing your toes to spread and splay. So roomy toe box for sure. That had been done. There are shoes that you could buy in wides. But I wanted the last to have more of a contoured shape, so it felt a little more snug and secure in the waist, secure in the heel, so that you felt more nimble, more agile. You're using all of those muscles in the toes. You're using all the sensitivity that you have there, but the shoe still has to feel like it's more a part of your body. I wanted to put some protection, not massive amounts of protection, but a little more protection underfoot, and I would vary it. I wanted to be able to transition people, having come from the FiveFingers experience where I saw some people get injured, really quickly. I wanted to make shoes that would allow somebody to transition to the most natural experience eventually. So we would offer different levels of cushioning, nothing that would be considered cushioned heavily or, by today's standards, certainly, but, with a little more protection than what I was making clearly at Vibram. And then I think the last thing is I believed in shoes that are on a level plane. people use the term zero drop, or, it's where the heel and the forefoot are on the same plane. But I also, as I described in that first run, when I had that sore soleus muscle, was because I wasn't quite used to running on a shoe with a level plane. So I said, well, I'm going to add a little bit of stack height in the back, a little more. So there would be a 5 millimeter drop, or a 3 millimeter drop, or a zero drop. Now, for anybody who knows their metrics, 5 millimeters is like, a quarter of an inch. It's not a very big heel.
No, but it's amazing. It's amazing how much you can feel that. I mean, what people forget is like, it's the difference between walking on polished cement versus being on a sidewalk. We're so sensitive to those little things, and we take it for granted. We don't even notice how sensitive we are to those little variations until they're put in front of our face or on our feet.
So I really wanted to take those three ingredients, the idea of the fit, the idea of this, low heel to toe drop, different amounts, slightly different amounts of cushioning. And I wanted to kind of package that into athletic footwear, running footwear, that also brought a certain craftsmanship, working at Rockport, where we literally made our own lasts, in a shop. You learn a level of craftsmanship that doesn't exist as much in our industry today. And I wanted to bring some of that concept of craftsmanship and shoemaking into this, while still combining it with, modern materials where you can, and a modern approach. So that was the concept behind the development of the brand.
But you overlooked my favorite part that I'm dying to hear.
I know. So the favorite part the punchline to the story is, when we launched the brand, it had all of those ingredients, which I loved, but it had one other ingredient, which is that we made, if Five Fingers were like a glove for the feet, we made a mitten. And so we had a pocket for the big toe, and then another pocket for the other 4 toes. And the reason we did that, as you well know, the big toe is really a key stabilizer in the body. So important for balance, agility, whether you're standing, running, moving, walking in any way. And so I wanted that to be isolated and independent so that it could move a little more freely. And so we launched the brand like that.
Pause. And just to add, this is not like it's a new idea for people who don't know. In Japan and in many parts of Asia, this is
Tabi shoes.
Tabi shoes, and this has been around for a long, long time. So this wasn't you pulling it out of your butt.
No, not at all. It's been around for, like you said, hundreds of years, and you can still see Tabi shoes a lot if you go to Japan. And so I loved that concept. And when we launched with 3 styles, all made that way. And people said, we like these shoes that they're lightweight. We like some of the characteristics and whatnot, but people just don't want this mitten construction. This is where it's really hard when you talk about launching a company. So here I've hired people, created something, brought it to market, and it's not working.
Right.
And you ask yourself 100 questions.
No, better. It's a good idea and it's not working.
Yeah. But you ask yourself, well, why didn't I test this more? Why didn't I do 1 or 2 shoes without the Tabi fit? There's time for that after the fact. You kind of second guess yourself. But in the moment, the deal is done. You took a stand, it didn't work. And it took us about 2 years to correct that issue. So we literally had to help people sell them through, or if they couldn't, and to avoid destroying relationships, we brought shoes back, sold them off in channels where it wouldn't, damage the brand, retooled the company, put more money into it, so this is the other thing, of course, is, as you well know, I admire how you've been able to, you basically bootstrap the company from nothing. This is a very capital intensive business we're in, and you got to build inventory and tooling and all these things. It's got a high barrier to entry, which is great, but it's hard when you're in the process. So to do it twice in 2 years, because we had to redo everything, that was very hard. But when we did come out the second time, people were like, oh, okay, this is better. We like this better. It's still, we're a lot of things we could improve. So trust me, there's things we can improve today all over, but it was enough to be able to get it up and off the ground. So I felt good about that, and it set us on a path that we're on today.
And again, congrats on that as well, because from one to another, this is a tough row to hoe. And it's you and I come from different backgrounds. So you come from a wholesale background, and I come from a digital direct background. Now we're both in this phase of how that's blending and what that's doing. And so watching what you've done has been really inspiring because, that hasn't been the direction that our company has taken up until recently, which, by the way, as a result of that, I could have had this conversation offline, but I'm going to do it now for the fun of it. Congratulations on getting some rep groups that we were trying to get.
Oh, well, we're all competing for good people. and so we all have the same
know who the
ideas.
good people are. There's a finite number of good people. And so congratulations on that. Damn you, man. But no, I'm super happy for you.
Oh, thanks. So we need more help than you do. So we need to
everybody needs help. We're all, look, my wife says it best. Her line is there's enough shoe companies in the world. There's no reason to ever have another unless what you're doing changes people's lives. And that's what we're doing in our slightly different ways. And that's, that's the important part. Getting people moving is thing number one. Getting people moving well is thing number two. And getting people moving as naturally as possible is all underneath or on top, however you want to, whichever image you want to use, umbrellas or foundations. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. And frankly, as I said in the email to reach out to you about this, I was remiss in not having this conversation ages ago with you and some of the other people we mentioned, Golden Harper from Ultra and some of our other friends who are in the biz. I'm still trying to get someone on here who thinks I have my head totally up my ass. That's my goal is to have that conversation because that'll be a lot of fun. And I know exactly who I want to, but he said no. So I don't know why. Actually, I want to leave on this one idea and because I've got to bounce in a couple of minutes anyway. You and I were on a panel discussion at the American College of Sports Medicine. It was you, me, and a guy from Brooks and a guy from Adidas talking about footwear and healthy feet, et cetera. It was the most well-attended event they, I think, ever had. It was beyond standing room only. And I have a lot of entertaining memories from that. I'm just wondering, what was your kind of takeaway from that conversation with two guys who were totally on the padded motion control, arch support, blah, 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 versus us on the other side of the fence?
So, it's funny. I've thought about that from time to time. And I think one of the things you mentioned earlier, how when you first started, how, hopefully I said some things that were encouraging because, it's not about just creating your own company and building this thing. You're trying to, as you are doing right now, you're trying to build a movement. And it happens with having multiple companies. It was nice to be in that situation where there was somebody else on my team, and frankly, you're even a little further on my team, a little further.
I was literally
sitting
to your left. Yes.
And so it was kind of cool. It was kind of reassuring, and I think it was interesting for everybody who got a chance to hear different perspectives and different points of view. Maybe it's a little like politics, which I almost hate to bring up, but some people come into those sessions and they've already got their mind made up and they're not going to change no matter what you say, no matter what you do. But there's always a percentage of people that come to those things that do have a willingness to listen. And those are the ones that you're hoping to touch, and that you can gradually, bit by bit, we can grow this understanding and awareness.
After that event, I said, if any large company was smart, they would acquire you or me, one of us, or both of us, and keep us all under the same roof. Because that conversation, like you said, 20% of the people were never going to switch from big padded arch support shoes. 20% were all on our team. And there's, 60% in the middle who were really there curious. And the best thing that we can do for any of them is highlight their own experience of the times they've been barefoot, the times they've been doing something natural, the times that they understand if you put a joint in a cast, it gets weaker. All of those things that are basically, what's the word I'm looking for, contrary to what they've been sold, because if their own experience is more powerful than a marketing message, that's what's going to get people to change. But fundamentally, if some bigger company could put on that event, if they put us on the road, just doing that conversation, because people want to hear, they're looking for solutions. Mm-hmm. They want to be able to run and walk and play and have fun and do that healthily and enjoyably for the rest of their life. If the end result of that conversation benefited that umbrella company, no matter which direction people landed, that would be the best possible solution, because then we would have the bonus of all this, the extra marketing and distribution and all those things that we're now trying to build. And we'd have a bigger audience to draw from when we, created these large events where people want to hear what's going on. The problem, I think, though, is that for a larger company like that, the people they would have to put on the road with us would have to have, ego strength like Narcissus, because you and I we point out the obvious and they have no response. And so, I heard from a couple, in fact, I said to the guys from Brooks and Adidas, I came up to them afterwards, and it was the most evil, psychologically manipulative thing I think I've ever done in my life. I came up to them and I said very lightheartedly, "Man, sorry I was so obnoxious out there. I didn't really mean to be." And they went, "It's okay." And I did it just to make them laugh, because otherwise I knew they were going to walk away very upset. I mean, they had no response to anything that we said. In fact, I have a link. I have the video, horrible quality, but I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes, because, we didn't get to respond to this one. One of the guys they both opened by saying they're trying to reduce injuries, improve performance. And I think it was the guy from Audi who said, we don't have any proof that we can do this, because doing that study would be very time consuming and very expensive and have a lot of confounds. And I'm thinking, dude, if you could make a shoe demonstrably better than the guy sitting next to you, it's worth billions of dollars a year. And you're telling me you haven't done it because it's difficult? Give me a break. You know why you haven't done it. You know the research. You know what's going on, or you're completely oblivious to it, which is even worse. But suffice it to say, I think that would be, in creating a movement, the thing that you need is eyeballs. You need attention. You need something that's going to make people engage in the conversation. And like you said, we're not going to get everyone. Not everything's for everybody, but the bigger the arena, the more impact you can have. And, that's really everything I'm doing, is trying to just make the conversation bigger, to be beneficial, like you said, also for all the companies that are doing this in the various ways that we're trying to. When I first started this, I emailed one of my now competitors and I said, "Just wanted to let you know what I'm doing." And he says, "I don't know if I should be happy or cry." I said, "Oh, you should be ecstatic, because I'm a much better marketer than you are. So I'm going to make the conversation much bigger than you ever thought possible. And you're going to make more money than you ever thought possible." And years later, when I met him personally for the first time, I said, "Was I right?" He goes, "Yes." He was very upset that I was correct. And we've since become good friends, though. Well,
anyway. I think it's the real reason to do it is because it all comes back to that thing. If you can make people's life better, if you can make the experience better, because that's the most gratifying. And I think that's got to be at the heart of it. If it's just about making money or, trying to be a big company, there's nothing really lasting in that. It doesn't get me up to work in the morning. But if you feel like what you're doing is really helping people, and we're lucky, during this time of the pandemic, a lot of people
started looking,
probably, started running, walking, hiking that weren't before. And it's great. It brought a lot of new people in, and a lot of those people ended up in your shoes or my shoes, because they were open-minded. They didn't have this, preconception that they needed this other thing. So it created a lot of opportunity.
Well, then let's end it on that note of here's to changing the world and having people be happier and healthier. And I just want to thank you for everything you've done in doing that. And thank you for all of your kind words and support over the years. As I said, it's been a treat. And anyway, I got to sign off and get out of here and go talk to someone who might help me get in front of more people. So thank you, Tony Post. If people want to find you, how do they do that?
So they can find us at Topo Athletic is the name of the company. And start at the website. You'll learn a lot about the company and see the products we make. I apologize. Our stock is a little devastated right at the moment. We've had a pretty good run, but it's going to be a lot better here in the next 30 days. So if you don't see what you want right off the bat, it'll be there soon.
Awesome. Fingers crossed. We're having the same issues. So anyway, thank you all for being part of the Movement podcast. Like I said, find out more at www.jointhemovementmovement.com, where you can find previous episodes and learn where you can interact with all this content and, share and like and thumbs up, et cetera, et cetera. Like I said, if you want to be part of the tribe, please subscribe. But also, if you have any comments or questions or recommendations of people you want on the show or things you want us to cover, drop me an email. Just send it to move@jointhemovementmovement.com. But most importantly, please go out, have fun, and live life feet first.